Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I like drinking wine more than I used to.
Nice. And this is part 2 of our Godfather Oscars discussion.
That's right.
The 50-year anniversary of The Godfather winning Best Picture at the Oscars, and the 51st year of The Godfather being released, one of the greatest movies of all time, and a favorite of mine. I'm sure a favorite of yours as well, but maybe not. We'll see. We'll talk about our personal reviews a little bit later.
We shall see.
If you've never seen this movie, I would highly recommend going to our first episode, the primer episode, and kind of getting an idea of what you're in for, when to watch it, and who's involved in the movie, and where to watch it as well. There's a very good discussion there where we won't spoil anything. But here we are, part 2, talking spoilers, and we're going to dive right into it and talking in front of the camera and moving our way back. And so with that being said, let's just dive right into it. And where I want to start is at the literal very beginning, or even maybe before the beginning. The opener to this movie, the opening credits of this movie, probably top 3 openers of all time. And part of the reason for that is because there's almost no credits in the opening. All we get is the black, and it goes, and then you hear the Godfather theme song start playing, the da na 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 na, and then we see the Godfather like come up, and the only credit is to the writer of the original book, and then we'll jump right into the movie. And that is like one of the greatest, in my opinion, it's one of the greatest openers to a movie ever.
Is that an opening credit, or is that just a title card though?
It's the opening credit title card. Like so it was actually a choice that they made when they were making the film to basically just not really have credits. Like most movies, you know, you've got 3, 4, 5 minutes of opening credits.
Yeah, I guess back in the day they did, didn't they?
Yeah, and this is kind of one of those first times that they didn't, and it's used masterfully. And I'm somebody who often fast forwards through those opening bits because I can't stand that. And so for me, this was like icing on the cake.
Chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss, yes.
Hey.
It would go like I said, it probably is in. It's probably number 1 for openers for a movie.
It takes the cannoli.
Yeah, takes the cannoli. Like second would maybe be like Pulp Fiction or something, but
I don't even remember Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction's like the one where it's like da na 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 na. Yeah, that one's an awesome one. But anyway, so we get that. Then we get the opener where Bonazera is there explaining the story of his daughter and what was done to her, and asking for justice from the Don.
She did not weep, but I did.
It's just like I said in the first episode, it's like a masterclass in filming. Like it's that cold open. We're in the black. All we see at this point is his face in the darkness, telling us the story.
Yeah.
This horrific story of his daughter,
and telling us the story.
Yeah,
he's looking right at us.
Right.
And we pull back and we see the Godfather looming in frame, right?
Yes.
Like we just see the back of his head and his shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And then it intentionally breaks the 180-degree rule, and suddenly, boom, we're facing the Godfather, Don Corleone.
Yeah.
I did it again, didn't I? Corleone?
Yeah.
Yeah, Corleone. Damn it.
I mean, it's Italian, so most Italian names you would pronounce the M, but I'm pretty sure it's Corleone.
No, it's Corleone. I'm not as Italian as I often get mistaken for Italian, but I just blew it. I just betrayed the confidence.
Like getting that intimate first look at what the business is and who the characters are. The wedding scene is incredible because it sets up everybody, who they are, what their personality is, where they fit in the family, as well as some other side characters like Luca Brasi. And
I hope that it is a masculine child.
Funny enough, they actually didn't almost have that as the opener for the movie. The opener for the movie almost was the wedding, and Coppola had to be convinced that the opening scene should be more like one of his older films, Patton.
Huh.
So that scene was rewritten, and again, it just draws you in so well immediately, right?
Oh, can you imagine? I can't imagine this movie starting any other way.
Right.
Like, geez.
And it sets up like the romanticism to the mafia and to the way that the business is run, right? Like it's so, everything's just so, you know, like I'll do you this favor, and someday you'll pay me back, and it's fine. Like, and
it is almost like, I think I mentioned in our primer episode, Vito says in that scene, he's like, we're not murderers. But again, I'm watching it like, aren't you though? Like, it's really, there is a weird mysticism to the gangsters, but there's also a weird sense of hypocrisy.
Right.
Right? Because, like, they're clearly bad dudes, but we don't really see them being bad all that often. Or at least when we see them being violent, it feels justified.
Well, and that's part of probably what makes this movie so special and so universally loved, is because it doesn't, it doesn't drag a lot of our heroes through the mud. It doesn't drag the Corleones through the mud very often.
Yeah.
They're all shown as like valiant, heroic characters. And, it's a story about this crime family, but it's a very clean look at that.
I was thinking, like, because Vito, Marlon Brando, is clearly the most captivating character in the whole movie. Mm-hmm. But, like, the movie almost kind of goes out of its way to make him seem moral, or at least moral compared to the alternative, But again, like, there's a scene later on where he's meeting with the other 5 families, and he's like, like, guns and liquor and women, these are victimless crimes. And I'm like, are they though? Like, especially that last part. Like,
yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's something that, based on my reading of the mafia, even at this point in American history, is definitely more romantic than actually what those mafia guys were doing at that point in time. Like, they were definitely involved with drugs at this point in time, and maybe always involved, had a drug connection, and there was definitely like they weren't good guys. They were not like the Corleones.
I think I'm not really a student of Italian American history, but like I think I did remember reading though that like Italians were extremely discriminated against when they came to America.
Yes,
and they often had to go to the mob for help and protection because the police didn't give a hot shit what they were going through.
Yeah, there's kind of, and that's also something probably very American, is the way
police not giving a hot
traveled.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of that is baked into American culture. But Italian Americans, when they heard this movie was coming out, and even the mafia at that point, were very against a movie like this coming out, because they were worried that Coppola wasn't going to paint them in a good light, because up until this point they also weren't painted in a good light in American cinema. And that probably also goes to that kind of underlying racism that you're kind of alluding to.
Kinda.
So, and post this movie, it was in part celebrated, especially by the Italian mob. Loved this movie.
Oh yeah.
But
why wouldn't they?
There's maybe a little bit of a love-hate relationship, because it's almost like if you think about like Narcos and Pablo Escobar, like Colombian people, Pablo Escobar put Colombia on the map, but he's also a very, very notorious figure. And
yeah, he also killed thousands of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, he was beloved right up until he wasn't. And maybe he wasn't always beloved in Colombia, but there's a romanticism to him as well that you could kind of compare to in the show Narcos.
Yeah, and it's just, again, this kind of ties in with, like, maybe what Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad took is how, like, we just kind of, you're almost automatically going to sympathize with the viewpoint character of any story.
Yeah.
Even when maybe you shouldn't.
Right.
And that said, though, like, I have to admit, like, Vito does come across as this very kind of loving, grandfatherly presence throughout the movie. Mm-hmm. Like,
and that was intentional, too, in the design of the character.
Yeah, really. So it's interesting. He does almost kind of, there's a lot of like tension, it seems, in this movie between the quote unquote new world and the quote unquote old world. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned before, Bossonera coming to Vito wanting vengeance when the American court system couldn't give him justice is very Old Testament, New Testament. Mm-hmm. And there's also this thing of like Vito kind of believes in the old ways of doing things, but everyone else is kind of getting into the new way of doing things, which is drugs, essentially, which Vito protests because he considers it a dirty business. Mm-hmm. And his protesting that is what leads to his assassination attempt.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah. And then I guess we got to get into Michael too, right?
Yep.
The tension between the old Godfather, Vito Corleone, and the new Godfather that Michael Corleone becomes.
Right. Do you want to do that discussion now, or what do you want to talk about?
Why don't we just do it now?
Sure.
Michael, he sort of becomes a much more brutal, much more ruthless Don.
Right.
Throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because he definitely wasn't the first choice to be the Godfather, even though Vito later admits that Sonny was a terrible Godfather and could never have really taken that role on.
Yeah, and Fredo, we don't even talk about Fredo.
So it's really interesting because there's that first inkling where you're like, oh, there's something under the surface here that with Michael. And when they're talking about like what they're going to do to retaliate with the police chief who's corrupt and the other mobster.
Salazar?
Yeah, Salazar.
What a sinister sounding name.
Is that what his name was?
It's Salazar or something.
Solazo.
Okay. I added a few extra syllables.
Yeah, so Solazo, and Michael comes up with this really ingenious plan. And at first everybody laughs it off, right? Partially probably because like they're not used to Michael being a part of the business. And he's also kind of bringing in these new ideas, right? These very like intelligent plans that there are several parts to put in motion.
It's really interesting. And I touched on this a little bit in our last episode, how like Sonny is all tempestuous and hot-headed and brutal, whereas Tom Hagen comes across as almost like very like cold and rational, but maybe a little overly cautious. And Michael is kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Like he's almost kind of a natural.
Yeah.
Like he comes up with the plan, oh, well, let's just invite them to a restaurant and I'll shoot both of them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay.
That's where like the connection to Breaking Bad is, right? Like he's very much similar to Walter White, or Walter White is very similar to him in their ingenuity and the way that they operate their business. What's really funny is the Better Call Saul episode, the first like episode where Saul shows up in Breaking Bad. Saul calls him Vito Corleone, and he calls himself Tom Hagen as consigliere.
Right, yeah.
which is really interesting, and there's actually several references after that in other episodes to The Godfather. But anyway, yeah, so Michael is definitely cold, and I love the transition of him to becoming a Godfather. That final scene with him and Kay, and he lies to her face. And then we get that final scene as they start conducting business, and it zooms back out of the room, and then they close the door in her face, is like just so poetic and so like
so cold.
Yes, so cold. And it's just like Michael has become the Godfather. Like that is the scene that just really solidifies who he is now.
Yeah.
And where his life is headed. And where his life is already headed, because he's there. He's now the Godfather. And even before that scene where he has everybody killed during the baptism is, again, brought up in Breaking Bad and used in Breaking Bad in a very similar way. But it's also a very powerful scene in showing like who Michael Corleone is. He's a cold-blooded killer, and he will do whatever he needs to put his family on top.
Basically, yeah.
And he will basically he just cuts everything. Like he, instead of like trying to deal with the other families and trying to, have this thing where I can't remember which character says it partway through the movie, where he says, oh, like, these turf wars, these mafia wars, they happen every 5-10 years. Like, everybody just got to blow some steam off, and then we all become friends again for another 5-10 years.
Yeah, which is funny when you think about it.
Yeah,
like,
and Michael's the one to break that cycle a little bit.
He's just scorched earth. Let's just kill everyone and figure it all out.
Yeah.
So... yeah, it's interesting. There's that. So after Michael shoots those dudes, he has to spend a year or so hiding out in Italy. And there's that scene where they go to that Italian town, and he says, "Where are all the men?"
That's Corleone, actually.
Right. He said no. He says like, "Where are all the men?" Yeah. Corleone, the the village where they're from originally.
Yeah.
And he says, "Where are all the men?" And one of his bodyguards said, "Oh, they've all been killed by vendettas."
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, I'm gonna bring that back to America with me.
Yeah, a little bit, eh? What a beautiful, like, kind of midway cut to, like, outside of New York. I love the juxtaposition between, like, being in New York and this very built up modern day and going into this little village.
It's one of those things where, like, it almost shouldn't work because it's just 10 or 15 minutes of Michael Corleone in Italy getting married and hooked up to an Italian lady, Apollina.
Yeah.
And, like, it almost feels like it should have been cut, but it somehow really works.
It really works.
Yeah.
And some of those scenes are like I looked over at Jess and I was like, God, this is such a beautiful town. Like, I just want to be there. Like, when they first show up at the town and you see it up on the hill, like, it's almost like I'm in awe at that point, at how beautiful and old school it is.
By the way, I love how he introduces himself to Apollina, in that he just he shakes her father down into being invited. Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong all these years. Instead of approaching the woman, I need to just intimidate her father.
That's a really great scene, and a part of what makes that scene great is Michael recognizes that he can't speak Italian well enough to actually convey what he wants well enough, and so he basically, like, in just a very, like, dominating way, just says, I'm going to speak English and you're going to translate for me, and this is how things are going to work, and this is how things are going to work. You're going to give me the opportunity with your daughter, basically. Like, we're going to meet. I am a very important man from a very important family, and we'll do this right. And it's going back a little bit to who Vito is and saying, you know, I will apologize for the way that we got off on the wrong foot here, and how they maybe misspoke to him originally about who Apollina was. But at the same time, there is a certain amount of respect that you owe me for who I am, and you will at least entertain the idea of giving your daughter to me.
I do have one slight complaint, actually, about the movie that does kind of tie in with Michael. And it's that, as much as I love this movie and as much as I think Al Pacino is fantastic as Michael Corleone, I do feel like his character arc is a little muddy at times. You know
what way do you mean?
I mean that, like, he feels a little remote. I don't really know that I have as good a sense of who Michael is.
I think that's maybe a little bit by design.
Maybe. It seems like, so he volunteers to shoot those two guys.
Right.
Which makes sense because the family's in danger. And then the whole implication is that, like, he kind of got a taste of power and control and now he wants more. So he's intimidating that guy into meeting his daughter. And then from there, afterwards, he ends up becoming a stone cold Godfather. So,
I mean, like, you are simplifying it in a way. Like, Apollina was murdered horrifically in front of him.
That is true. That does happen.
And then after that, I mean, not even after that, but right around that same time, his brother is horrifically murdered.
Also that, yeah.
And there's a point in time where I think he just has to step up and fill the role that his father and then his brother tried to fill. And it's somewhat forced upon him, but he's also started to grow to accept and want that kind of power and influence.
It's almost kind of like, I'm not walking back what I just said, but what is kind of interesting is how, like, it seems like there is this more brutal, more violent criminal world that's forming around them. Vito doesn't really want any part of it, but Michael just adapts to it.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, it's a more brutal, more cutthroat business. Fine, I'm going to kill all my enemies.
And that's where I draw the comparison with the first season of Westworld and William in it, because William is this character who he's brought to Westworld by his brother-in-law, who is one of the owners of Westworld.
Right.
And his basically, he doesn't seem like the kind of person who wants to be involved in the prostitution and the murder and everything that goes on at Westworld, like the kind of selling aspects to the very wealthy people who go there. And he's kind of pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed by his stepbrother until it's almost like he snaps. And at that point, like, he embraces all of the chaos around him and is like, I'm going to adapt and be the person that I need to be to find success in this situation. And it's a very, very similar character. And you should really watch the first season of Westworld because it's amazing.
I will at some point.
But I think it's a very similar arc in that, where it's a character that, partially because of who he was and where he was in line with the family, was never really considering that role. He goes off to war, and who knows what war was like for him as well, right? Like, who knows who he was before the war, and who knows the person that the war made him into up until this point in time where we start the movie.
I guess but the fact that we're sitting here saying who knows, I kind of wish I had known a little bit more about him.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a blank slate there, and maybe part of that is also because of how much runtime this is, and how much this is just as much Vito's story as it is Michael's story. It's the end of Vito's story and the beginning of Michael's story.
Yeah.
It's good to want more, I think, but at the same time, we're kind of being dropped off in this world at a very pivotal moment. And
it kind of reminds me of that Rick and Morty quote where it's like, wow, you're really leaning into this quickly, Dwayne. No, it's like, wow, you sure leaned into this quickly, Dwayne.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about some of the improvisation and ad-libbing that was going on, and this happens throughout the film, actually, and I have several key scenes that I want to discuss with you.
Okay.
So, and part of this actually stems from Coppola himself. He would actually have improvisational rehearsal sessions, and what they would do was have dinner together. Like, the whole Corleone family and him would have dinner together, and he forced all of them to be in character. You couldn't break character during dinner, and just kind of get a feel for, like, what everybody's role was within the family, as well as who your character was, which I think is a really interesting way to...
I would have given anything to have been a fly on the wall during those dinners.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of what makes everything feel so organic within the Corleone family household. Like, think about all of those scenes where everybody's kind of running around doing their own thing. Like, it's a very chaotic but organized chaos to it.
It does feel like a real family.
Yeah.
You know? Like...
I very much agree. Another improvisation that's one of my favorites that I actually wrote down that I didn't respect as much as I did this time around was when Sonny throws the camera on the ground at the beginning, near the beginning of the movie, from the paparazzi or the news reporters or whoever, and then throws the money on the ground afterwards to kind of pay him back.
Yeah.
That was actually all improvised, like, and that was the original, like, the first shot and take of it, because he wasn't supposed to take the camera and smash it on the ground. And so the shock of the actor who was playing the cameraman was real. And so, like, it's just a really well done scene. And, like, I laughed really hard when he just throws the money aggressively at him afterwards.
Yeah, it's like, pick it up.
And basically, like, his explanation for that was that what he said was, where I came from, you break something, you replace it, or you paid the owner. So I love that. Just James Caan, like, putting a little personality into the role.
I guess so. Yeah. God, he is fantastic in this movie.
Yeah.
The scene where he finds out his little sister is being beaten. Mm-hmm. And he just runs the guy down in the street and kicks the shit out of him in front of everyone. Like, which is the correct response if you find out your sister's in danger. But just, man, it's such a great scene. Although I will say, there are some punches that very clearly don't connect.
There's some awkwardness to it. However, I do want to say there's a little bit of drama on shoot with those two characters, or with those two actors. So James Caan and Gianni Russo, they did not get along, and they were definitely arguing throughout the movie. And so when Sonny beat Carlo, James Caan was actually, like, throwing some real punches in there, as well as, like, some of the fake stuff. Like, he actually broke 2 of Russo's ribs.
Ouch.
And chipped his elbow. And in addition to all of that as well, when he grabs the garbage pail and then beats him with that was all improvised as well. Like, he just took those props that were on.
James Caan essentially just beat a guy up on camera.
Yeah, it was fantastic, wasn't it?
It was pretty fantastic.
That scene really cements the hatred of those two characters as well, right? Like, it's very believable later on when you realize that Sonny was murdered by Carlo, essentially.
I mentioned earlier, there's that scene where they're all eating dinner and the sister Connie says like, Daddy didn't talk business at the table. And her husband says, shut up.
Right.
And Sonny very clearly wheels around and says, don't you ever tell her to shut up.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, this is excellent foreshadowing. Like we're seeing the seeds of the conflict are planted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they never wanted him to be a part of the family either. And I don't know if that's because they maybe knew who he was or what his personality was like and how he didn't gel, or maybe if it was just like he wasn't a part of the family for
well, there's that scene
enough.
earlier on where Tom Hagen says to Vito, like, what does he say? Like, do we get Carlo involved? And
yeah,
what does Vito say? He's like, no, like doesn't he say like give him a wage, but like don't talk business with him or something? Yeah.
Vito knows that he's not a great guy, I don't think.
Yeah.
But Vito's also a respectful and wants his daughter to be happy. So
yeah. What's funny is that like there are similarities between Carlo and Sonny. They're both cheating on their wives. They both have incredible tempers. Like it's almost. Yeah, they're almost kind of mirror images of each other.
Yeah, you know what? You're not wrong actually there, and that's what makes maybe their conflict so interesting and almost like hypocritical in a way.
Kinda, yeah.
And the only difference is that Connie is just part of the family, right?
Yeah. So,
and actually, on this note as well, when Sonny's murdered, I didn't remember that Carlo was responsible for Sonny's murder. First of all, when the phone call came through, I thought that was a really strange call. Like, how does somebody so blatantly like talk to somebody's wife and just like not insinuate that she's meeting up to hook up with her husband, but also completely just obviously sound like she's hooking up with your husband. So that phone call threw me off. And then when Sonny goes over there and I remember a second before Sonny's killed, I have two thoughts right through my head. I'm like, oh my God, this is about to be where Sonny gets murdered. And then the second thought I had was, how did everybody know that Sonny was going to be here at this specific point in time?
Yeah.
Did either of those thoughts kind of go through your head at all when you were watching, or did you remember that?
I remember. I kind of got I was pretty sure the brother-in-law had something to do, because I kind of remember that the movie ends with Michael killing him, right? And then, which by the way, great scene. By the way, this movie gave me so much anxiety in the sense that I am never letting anyone sit behind me in a car ever again. Like,
it's probably a good move.
Yeah, there's that great scene early on when there's that one guy who has been sick for a while, and Sonny is convinced that he had something to do with setting Vito up.
Right.
So they're like, oh, we're just going to go pick up some mattresses.
Yeah, Paulie.
Yeah. And then they shoot him in the back of the head. And then there's that great line where it's like, leave the gun, take the cannoli.
Yeah.
So
what a cool area. Side note, what a cool spot to shoot that, like with the backdrop of the
wheat fields or whatever it is.
No, but the wheat fields, but then behind that you see Lady Liberty as
well.
Yeah,
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I was saying to Jess at that point, I was like, I wonder if that area still exists or if it's completely built up by now.
It's just where the mob went to take a leak and
it used
shoot
to be
people
probably
in the back of the head.
Yeah.
There are two great garrote scenes in this movie where they garrote people around the neck and like...
Right, Luca Brasi.
Yeah, the Luca Brasi scene in particular, I was sitting there thinking like, how the hell did they shoot this? Like, Did they actually strangle this guy on camera?
That sure looked like it.
Yeah, like his eyes are bulging out of his head.
Yeah.
Anyways, what were we talking about?
Oh, we were talking about the...
Oh, right, the plot point. Yeah, I was a little like... Because, okay, I do have another slight criticism of this movie in that I didn't realize it took place over 10 years. And the time jumps felt a little sporadic to me at times. Because, like, Sonny beats up Carlo. Awesome. He deserves it. And then, like, 5 minutes into the movie later, he picks his fight with his wife. And he's got no bruises or anything. So this is very clearly, like, a year or so later.
Right.
So, but it wasn't immediately obvious to me. I mean, I guess it's not so much that it wasn't immediately obvious. It just felt a little like... I don't know. The time jumps felt a little strange to me.
Yeah, it wasn't always necessarily clear where we were.
Like when you told me when we started recording that this takes place over 10 years, I was like, oh, so it does. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with you that it's not necessarily always clear.
So, but again, on that plot point of how Sonny got murdered, it is a little
It just feels
Carlo,
like almost like a plot hole the first time you watch it.
I don't know if it feels like a plot hole, but it does feel a little like, so Carlo intentionally picks a fight with his wife because he knows Sonny will fly off the handle.
Right.
They set up a thing at a toll road, and then they blast him, Bonnie and Clyde style.
Right.
Look how they massacred my boy. But see, that's why Sonny's such a captivating character, though, is that, like, you know, you can tell he's maybe not a good guy, but he cares about his family, but just he's so hot-headed. He keeps getting into trouble, right? Even the whole... So this mob war is going on for a year or so, and I think there's that scene where Tom Hagen kind of says to him, like, I forget explicitly what he says, but he kind of says, like, hey, maybe we should cool our jets on the mob war. Like, this is getting out of hand. And Sonny's just like, nah, screw it. Like, I'm angry. Like, yeah. So,
very emotional character.
Very emotional,
and very emotional leader style.
Yeah. Like, he definitely, I stand by what I said. Great night, terrible king.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I think that's a really good analysis.
Yeah.
Going back to improvisation a little bit, and also the character of Johnny Fontaine. I love the character of Johnny Fontaine.
Do you mean not Frank Sinatra?
Not Frank Sinatra. And more on that later. Let's go back to that in our effects and filming, and also kind of discussing the novel. But Johnny Fontaine, the smack that Vito gives him, and that really awesome line where he tells him to be a man.
Yeah. You could be a man.
That was actually improvised. That smack was a real smack, and it was improvised by Marlon Brando, of course. And so Al Martino, Johnny Fontaine's actor, his confusion was real, and he just kind of had to roll with it. And James Caan said Martino didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. So it was a real shocker.
Can you imagine going home from work and being like, how was work, honey? Marlon Brando slapped me. Like, yeah. That is really interesting, and just how the very man's world of this movie, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very... The way masculinity is portrayed in this movie is really interesting. Like, so the context for that scene is Fontaine has this part that he wants, but he doesn't think he's going to get it, and he's scared his career is on a downturn, so he kind of sheds a couple tears in front of his godfather and is immediately punished for it.
Yeah.
You know, you could be a man. What does he say? Like, all these Hollywood types get you crying like a woman. But then he immediately is like, all right, hey, go have fun, go relax, I'll take care of it.
Right.
It's like, hey, I love you and I'll take care of you, but you are not allowed to show weakness in front of me.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Because he's an ally of the family, right?
Well, it's like, I love you and I'll take care of you, but you have to be a man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that he's kind of in contrast to the other people that we come and see ask for favors, right?
Right.
The other like characters are like, I want justice and I'm passionate about this, and I'm here with my story and asking for help, and he's like sitting here just like crying, like, oh, I'm not getting the part.
I'm not going to be a famous actor. Yeah. And you could be a man. Yeah, there's also that part too. But yeah, I guess, and just the way the women are relegated to the sidelines in this movie too. Like,
yeah, and maybe this is a good point to talk about that.
You know, it's interesting, especially that early scene with the Undertaker, Brazzara or whatever.
Yep.
So the whole thing is his daughter was beaten up by these two men who tried to sexually assault her, and he wants them murdered for it. And the Don says, well, your daughter's still alive, so why would I murder them? And he says, like, well, she'll never be beautiful again. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, so she's ruined now because she's not beautiful anymore, right? Or like how, Connie, the daughter, and the wife, Carmela, like, they barely have anything to do with the family. They're very much relegated to the background. I don't even think Carmela has a line in the movie.
I think she says a few words, but they're not like central at all at any point in time.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? And that's there's maybe an interesting point here to analyze too, in the fact that Kay is really the only one who has a personality from the get-go, right? And her and Michael are even when they're discussing things back and forth at the beginning of the film.
At the beginning.
And there's a transition to Michael finally becoming a part of the family. And over that process, Kay, again, is pushed into the background.
Yeah, I mean, the final shot of the movie is the door being closed in her face.
Exactly.
It's like, hey, this is where, okay, men are talking. Like,
Yeah.
you don't get to see this part.
Yeah.
So.
And that's kind of, I think it's somewhat purposeful.
Oh, it's absolutely deliberate. But yeah, it is interesting how even the whole Apollonia thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's basically just like, oh, wow, I like her. And then he's like, oh, wow, she's pretty. Like, he's basically just kind of slips on in there. And then while he's still kind of romantically involved with Kay, gets married to this Apollonia lady.
Right.
And then she blows up, and he doesn't really seem to even mention her ever again.
And actually, that's something that's really funny is the actor who was playing her actually refused the role at first because she basically walked out of the rehearsal because she was basically like, all the character is somebody beautiful who he meets, they get married, and then she dies, and that's literally the character. Why would I want to play this? And
then what?
Like,
Marlon Brando and Luca Brasi approached her in private and said either her brains or her signature are going to be on this contract.
Oh man, that's a great quote.
Yeah,
I love that quote.
Yeah, it's true though, right? Like it is, and also like Sonny, Michael cheats on his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Sonny is routinely cheating on his wife.
Yep.
Fredo is banging cocktail waitresses two at a time. Yeah. Which also I'm like, really? But like it is actually Tom Hagen seems to be the only guy who isn't mistreating women in his life.
Right.
But that's just because we never see him with a woman.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know. Vito seems to disapprove. Like there's that scene where Sonny says something stupid during a meeting, and Vito says like, he says something like, he's like, all that running around with that young girl has got you soft between the ears.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So.
Well, Vito's like old style, right? Like he's all about the honor.
Yeah, I don't think Vito would cheat on his wife.
No.
Even though we barely ever see them in the same room together.
Yeah. But there's definitely like a different code of honor to him than the rest of his family at this point in time. And that's probably also just because of Vito having more of a struggle to get to where he is. Whereas, the rest of the Corleones, up until the inflection point of the movie, there isn't a lot of struggle for them, or we don't see a lot of struggle.
It's kind of like that recurring thing, about how great men usually have terrible sons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fortunately, our dads weren't great men, so there's still a chance for us.
Yeah, and so I think this movie, there's a bit of a commentary on that at this point in time in American history, women don't have a lot of rights.
Mm-hmm.
And they're definitely like a little bit pushed to the background in this family.
Okay, so the final scene, so Michael has Carlo murdered, garroted. Mm-hmm. In the back from the back seat of a car, and Connie goes to him in hysterics, saying that he killed her husband. He basically just has her taken away, and then Kay says like, "Did you do it?" And he basically says, "Don't ever ask me about my business, but just this one time, you can ask me." She says, "Did you do it?" He's like, "No." He's lying through his fucking teeth,
right?
And then. That's basically how the movie ends. Like,
yeah.
He's just...
That unsettling feeling where Michael is no longer the good guy.
No, he's kind of just...
It's the final closing of the chapter of any redemption that Michael might have as a person.
Yeah, and he lies to her so,
Yeah,
he doesn't even blink. And then, his sister rightly assumes that he murdered her husband. He's just like... Oh, she's hysterical. Those women. I don't know why he has a Boston accent just now, but hey, those women, they're hysterical. I'm Michael Corleone. I talk like this for some reason. It's getting late, but what were we saying?
We were just talking about some ad-lib stuff. There's a few other scenes that I want to talk about, and then if there's any other scenes that you want to talk about, we can discuss those too. I want to talk quickly about the restaurant scene. This isn't the first time that we see characters speaking in Italian, and the scene prior to is actually dubbed over, like you understand when they're speaking Italian what's being said. And in this scene, I was kind of confused. I was like, did they just accidentally make a mistake here and forget to add the dub in on YouTube.
Are you
or
talking
whatever.
about subtitles?
Yeah, subtitles.
Yeah.
Um,
That did seem a little inconsistent.
Yeah, and so there's actually a very interesting reason behind that. It's because Lazo is just speaking at such a rapid clip that they tried to subtitle it, and because he's speaking so fast and saying so many things, they actually couldn't subtitle it. It didn't work. So they just basically left it without subtitles, and basically you're just supposed to sit there and infer based on Michael's voice and a few Italian words that kind of sound English.
You know what I thought it was? I thought it was a stylistic thing, because it seemed to me, and I could be wrong, but it seemed to me that like when people spoke Italian in America, it was never there were never subtitles, but when they spoke Italian in Italy, there were subtitles. I thought that was like a stylistic choice.
No, they spoke Italian beforehand. That's why it jumped out at me as off, because there were subtitles in a scene prior to that, and it was just because of like filming it, they couldn't, and they'd already filmed it, and this was in the edit room that they realized that they had a problem.
When screw it. So for one scene, we don't speak. It's almost like Michael was so nervous he forgot to speak Italian.
So if you're wondering, I actually do have the English version here. So
I would like to hear what he says.
So he starts with, "I am sorry. What happened to your family was business. I have much respect for your father, but your father, his thinking is old-fashioned. You must understand why I had to do that. Now let's work through where we go from here." And so then he goes to the bathroom and he comes back and he say, "Everything all right? I respect myself. I understand and cannot allow another man to hold me back. What happened was unavoidable. I had the unspoken support of the other family dons. If your father were in better health, without his eldest son running things, no disrespect intended, we wouldn't have this nonsense. We will stop fighting until your father is well and can resume bargaining. No vengeance will be taken. We will have peace, but your family should interfere no longer."
Yeah, all right.
He's trying to convince Michael, and he's trying to approach Michael in the right way as well, like in a cool manner. Like that wouldn't have worked with someone like Sonny, but with Michael, I think that's the right approach. But at this point, you know, there's definitely the dark side to Michael that's starting to brew here. And what's really dark about it is what the other character says to him when they're planning this is, you know, you go to the washroom, you walk out, and you just pop them, like immediately. Like you don't even sit down, you pop them, you walk out. And Michael decides to sit down with them and listen to them and then shoot them point blank in the face.
I didn't catch that. That is interesting.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but it is like a little bit of a difference from what the plan is he decides to almost like, you know, simmer on the moment for a little while longer, that he's got them. Like he's got them. He knows that he's got them, that there's nothing they can do at this point. He's got the gun, and all he's like waiting for is just the right time to blow their brains out.
Pop them in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun times.
Yeah. Speaking of deaths, let's talk Don Corleone's death and his death scene. So that death scene was in the novel, but was not originally intended to be in the movie. They didn't want it in there because studio executives thought, you know what, we can just show the funeral scene and the audience can just infer what happened, that he died. And so Coppola shot the scene with 3 cameras in a private residence. And basically they just made that garden up in a day and then immediately tore it down after filming. And he told Marlon Brando, "We're not even going to write lines for you. Just do whatever you want with the scene."
Uh-oh.
Which is, I mean, that's on point for Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
Marlon Brando, you get 2 things with him as an actor. You either get him completely ad-libbing his lines and just figuring it out because he's a method actor and he just wants to be in character, and you just let him do his thing.
Well, that's what they did for Apocalypse Now, right?
Yep.
He just kind of went off the handle.
Exactly. Or Marlon Brando was a guy who never once first read his lines, and he would just have his lines carded up everywhere. It's like people would hold like what are those called? Cue cards.
Cue cards up
and for his lines. And so he, like, a lot of his takes in this movie and his other movies would just be like the first time he is reading that line, he's literally reading that line and reacting to it and deciding how his character is going to react to it. And that's the first take, and that's the take that they take always.
It's kind of funny how irresponsible and lazy that is, but he's still so brilliant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's the only one who can get away with it.
It's kind of, there's that movie he did, Last Tango in Paris, where like There's a scene where he's like kneeling by his wife's altar and he's like staring up at the ceiling into this light, almost kind of though he's talking to God. And it's a very powerful moving scene, but it kind of loses something when you realize it's just Marlon Brando looking up at his cue cards.
Yeah. Just a guy standing over him like that.
Yeah. So
that's hilarious.
anyways,
You know what scene we haven't talked at all about is the scenes with the movie executive who Tom Hagen is sent to go bargain with.
Yeah.
Give him an offer he can't refuse. I really love that scene because, Tom is a very subdued person. He's very controlled. Like, when he's talking to that studio executive,
he's measured.
Yeah, he's very, yeah. And then, like you said, there's the really funny line where the guy's spitting racist remarks at him and he's like,
I'm German Irish.
yeah. and then when the first scene that they're talking there on set, when he basically says, you know what, let's have dinner together and we'll talk about this further. He literally grabs the executive producer's fist, shakes it, and walks out. Like not his hand. He's sitting there with his fist, and he grabs his fist and shakes it.
Yeah, it's just like, all right.
That moment.
That actually went over my head, but
next time you watch it, pay attention because it's hilarious.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I said earlier Sonny might be my favorite character. It might actually be Tom. It might actually be Tom Hagen.
Tom's like the character that, because he's gets his hands the least dirty, he's probably the easiest to empathize with.
Well, his position is also the most unique.
Right.
Like, he's a Corleone, but he's also kind of not.
He's the most outside looking in. So
you know what? What's interesting, though, not to cut you off, is when he has to deliver the news about Sonny, he refers to Carmela as Mama.
Right.
But then I don't think he never calls Vito Dad.
No.
Yeah. So Carmilla is Mama, but he never calls Vito Dad. He just calls him like... he occasionally refers to him as like the old man in the same way Sonny refers to him as the old man.
Right.
But yeah, I did think that was interesting.
I didn't notice that. But also on the note of the executive producer and all of those kind of scenes, I wanted to note the horse's head scene, because that is a very famous scene, an infamous scene where they find the horse's head in the blankets, and that's a very notorious scene as well, because it just so happens that horse's head is real.
Yep.
And it was a very big sticking point for human rights activists. So here's the whole background story to this.
Spill the tea. They
got the horse's head from a dog food plant, a dog manufacturing food plant, and so basically it was just like a byproduct of that.
So it's not like they cut the horse's head off.
No,
they just found a dead horse's head.
They just like went to like a dog food manufacturing plant and were like, "Can you spare a horse head?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure."
I don't see why not.
So I mean, it's not like they killed a horse outright for this. Yeah, I mean, they probably could have gone with a fake, but that's the way things, I guess, were done back then.
I guess so.
What's really interesting about that scene is the actor playing the executive producer didn't know that was a real horse's head until he threw the blankets open and it was sitting at his feet. So the screaming of him is very real in that scene.
It's kind of like how they chucked Alan Rickman off Nakatomi Plaza, right?
Yeah.
Without telling him. It's like, I guess sometimes you have to mess with your actors.
Only the best do that.
Yeah, only the best can get away with that.
Talking about Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah. So, this movie did make me shed a couple manly tears. Mm-hmm. The scene towards the end where Michael and Vito have a very private moment, and Vito is getting on in years, and he kind of just admits that he never wanted this. It's like, I never wanted this life for you, Michael.
Right.
He's like, I wanted better things for you, like Governor Corleone, like Senator Corleone, like, there's a lot of remorse in that scene.
Yeah.
But it's also, who else was qualified to take over?
Yeah.
Sonny was a good guy, but he wasn't qualified to be the Don, and Vito admits it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Fredo. I was actually just reading that. Did you know that Fredo has now become... A Fredo that's a term for a weak link.
Yep.
It's like, if you think being named Karen sucks, try being named Fredo. Like, it's now synonymous with, like, weakness and incompetence.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably not a lot of kids named Fredo these days, but...
I should hope not. By the way, when Fredo shows up later in the movie, I almost didn't recognize him because like he's wearing like a swanky new suit and he's got a spray tan and sunglasses.
Yep.
It was a minute before I was like, wait, Fredo?
Just having a fun time being a playboy in Vegas.
Really went native, and he's really a Vegas native now.
Yeah. Oh,
Jesus.
man. That was a great scene as well, actually, with Mo Green. Like, the actor who plays Mo Green was really the right character for the role. Like, he really plays up, like, this smarmy, like, businessman. You know, like, he's like, you know, you don't tell me about my business and what I do. Like, I buy you out.
Well, there's that famous line where he's like, I made my bones when you were still dating cheerleaders.
Yeah. And like, it's really interesting because it's also another character moment of showing who Fredo is, because Mo Green regularly slapped Fredo around, and the rest of the Corleones you would never do that to.
Yeah, you don't lay hands on a Corleone.
No.
Yeah.
And Fredo was the exception. And, you know, like, Michael sticks up for him, but Michael's also the younger of the children, and like I said, no other Corleone you would allow that for. And we see specifically that Connie, anytime that Carlo lays hands on her, there are repercussions to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
then you find out that, like, this has kind of been happening off screen for a while now. And
yeah, but then, you know, Fredo kind of backpedals. He's like, hey, you know, like, blah. He kind of backpedals and makes excuses, but then, you know, Michael very coldly says to him, like, don't take sides against the family.
Right.
Don't ever take sides against the family.
Yeah,
like,
which is a very important rule.
Yeah.
To the Corleones. Let's talk a little bit more about, like, how the cinematography was and how they shot this film. Like, it shot very point of view-esque. Like, most scenes, it feels like you're there and you're just the extra character in the room.
Kinda, yeah.
And like you said, with the lighting is very dark for most of the film, and the kind of the purpose behind that is to show, like, you know, this is kind of a CD operation, right? Like, this isn't just some mom and pop store. Like, this is what they're doing is very illegal.
Yeah.
And while we do empathize with these characters because of how they're portrayed, there's also a darkness here that we can't forget about.
Yeah, definitely.
And what's really interesting is there's only one scene in the entire movie that's shot from an aerial point of view, and that's the scene when the Don is shot. That's the only single scene in the movie where Coppola convinced the cinematographer, George Willis, to do that.
Get a crane out?
Yeah.
And
so the reason why they did that as well is Coppola wanted it because he wanted it from God's point of view. And that's what they wanted to show the scene.
That is a great scene, too. Especially with how useless Fredo is.
Yeah, it's just like anybody else who was there, and maybe the Don doesn't get shot or maybe
5 times in the back.
Yeah, or maybe there's some sort of, like, you know, vengeance. Like, maybe whoever's there is actually in time to actually gun those guys down, and immediately we would find out, you know, who did it and why they did it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's Fredo, literally Fredo just, like, jumps out of the car, like, bumbles the gun, and then they're gone.
And then he cries.
Yeah. The ineptitude of Fredo, which is something we'll get back to. And I think this is a good point to segue into our sequels, prequels, and reboots.
Okay.
So it's based on a novel by Mario Puzo, and it was written in 1969. Funny enough, the novel itself was, at the time it was writing, before it was even completed, somebody at Paramount had gotten word of what he was writing and decided to buy the rights to the movie before it was even finished being written. So,
wow, that must have felt good.
Yeah, whoever that executive was would be bragging about that for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something there. If you are somebody who likes to read, go check that out. I haven't read it myself yet.
I know Mario Puzo was he also co-wrote the screenplay.
Yes,
with
he did.
Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, and he actually Coppola ended up giving him a writing credit on it as well, and that's why that was actually an argument in the opening credit where they show the Godfather. It actually says his name on top as well, which is something the studio didn't want.
Mario Puzo's the Godfather.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And so it was a level of respect for him because he was so involved in everything with the book.
As an aspiring novelist, I can respect that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, eh? The Godfather has 2 sequels. So there's The Godfather Part 2, which comes out 2 years after this, which I'm sure we'll cover in 2 years' time. it's also considered one of the greatest films of all time. And it's often actually debated whether or not it's the better of the two.
I've never actually seen it myself.
I've only seen it once. I've seen The Godfather a number of times, and it's just because it's a sequel movie that you probably just watch it less. Like, that's something that I always do. But question for you, are you going to go and watch the second one? Like, do you want to watch that one after seeing this?
I probably should, shouldn't I? What's interesting is that, like, this movie, it doesn't feel like it needed a sequel.
And yet, the second one is, like I said,
shockingly good.
Yeah, so the second one, it's kind of interesting because not only is it, like, Michael's story, but it, again, is interwoven with Vito Corleone's story as a young Vito coming to America.
Played by De Niro, right?
Played by Robert De Niro himself.
Wow.
And this is something we actually briefly talked about in our Heat episode, is because it's playing around with two different timelines in the Corleone family. Al Pacino and Robert De Niro don't meet in this movie and don't meet for like 20 years, basically, until he on scene together.
That is interesting. And De Niro won an Academy Award for it, right?
I believe so. I didn't look at that.
I think he won the Academy Award for playing young Vito Corleone.
Yeah.
And Marlon Brando won the Academy Award for playing old Vito Corleone.
He did win that award, yes.
Yeah.
And what's really actually interesting about this as well is part 2 was actually greenlit by the studio before the first movie was even finished filming.
Wow, they liked it that much, eh?
There was so much buzz about the movie and how good it was going to be and how everybody was so excited about what they were filming that they were like, let's do it. Let's make a second one.
Wow.
And you do not hear that very often in Hollywood.
No, if anything, you hear the opposite. Like, oh, it's going how badly? Okay, let's can it.
Well, if you think about it, even like a recent tale is Dune, right? Like if you were one of the first people to see Dune in theaters in the first week or so, there wasn't a part 1 on the title of Dune. It was just Dune because Denis Villeneuve wasn't sure if he was going to get a second movie, right? The first movie had to do well before they were going to be given the option to do the second one.
So did they actually change it while it was still in theaters to Dune Part 1?
Yeah.
I didn't know they actually could do that.
Yeah, that is something that happened. So kind of very interesting. So this is very much a one-time scenario where that happens.
Okay.
And we'll talk about The Godfather Part 2. I don't want to talk about that too much here, just in case there's spoilers and you haven't seen it either. So I want to leave that one. We'll do it on this podcast.
My mom remembers seeing it in theaters.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of her.
Me too.
Yeah, we will do that one in 2 years from now. I think I'm going to watch The Godfather Part 2 the next week.
Okay.
Because I really enjoyed this one and I forgot how good it was. And I need to see Part 2 and just compare and contrast it to the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And see which one, A, holds up better, but B, which one I just enjoy more. And whether or not I should maybe watch The Godfather 2 a little bit more often as well.
Yeah, maybe. I don't even know what it's about.
Yeah,
I know nothing about it.
I'm excited. Maybe you and I should watch it together sometime.
Maybe
soon.
we should, actually.
And then Part 3 comes out in 1990, years and years after Part 1 and Part 2 in the early
widespread
70s.
Critical acclaim.
You know what? So The Godfather Part 3 is not remembered as the strongest movie in the trilogy.
Right.
And what's really interesting about The Godfather Part 3 is if you actually look at the reviews and not just like the anecdotal The Godfather 3 is a disaster, the reviews are mostly positive for the movie.
Right.
But there is some asterisks to that. Apparently, and I haven't seen the third part because again, I kind of followed like what the general consensus was that this movie wasn't essential viewing.
Right.
But the plot apparently is a little bit of a jumbled up mess, and Sofia Coppola, who is Francis Coppola's daughter, has a starring role in this film as well, and apparently she just is a god-awful actor in the movie. And
good director.
Yeah.
Just not an actress.
Yeah, she's a great director, apparently.
Yeah, I loved Lost in Translation. But it's funny how, though, Coppola was wise enough to cast his sister, and she did a great job.
He didn't want to cast his sister, though, right?
Oh, he didn't.
Reluctantly. No, the studio was like, no, she's actually a good actor.
Oh, it's the studio who campaigned for her. Okay. Yeah. So he works with his sister, and she's fantastic. But then he casts his own daughter, and it's...
Yeah. Although Sofia Coppola does make an appearance in The Godfather Part 1, she is the baby Michael, who gets baptized.
Oh.
because she had just been born at that point in time. So they just used her.
Hey, I get that. Kind of makes sense.
We got a baby.
That's kind of neat. I could just imagine like Coppola going up, like getting out his megaphone. He's like, "Does anyone have a baby?" Like,
wait, I have a baby.
Yeah, get her over here.
But actually, so on the note of Godfather Part 3, in 2020, there was a re-released version put out by Coppola that's re-edited called The Godfather Coda: The Death of Michael Corleone.
I've heard of that.
It's apparently there's only very slight changes to the movie, and mostly in the beginning and end of the film. But it is, if you're going to watch the third part, it seems like that is the more better, well received of the two versions. So,
but it's only like marginally better.
Like,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Like marginally better. Like it fixes some of the issues with the film, but I would recommend checking that out over the original Part 3.
Did you know that Sylvester Stallone released a re-edit of Rocky IV within the last couple of years?
I did not know that. Like the one with
Ivan Drago in Russia.
Oh, that's the one he decided to fix?
He fixed. Apparently there were things that have been bothering him all these years, and he decided to fix it. So.
I am somewhat shocked that he chose that one to fix. Not number 5.
Exactly.
But
you fixed
number 5 might be unfixable.
Well, you fixed number 5 by just not watching it. Yeah. You know,
that's a good point.
I saw a talk show appearance with Stallone where they asked him to rate all the Rocky movies, and he did. Number 1 was like a 10. Number 2 was a 7.5. Number 3 was a 9. Number 4 was a 7.5.
Number 3 is Mr. T, right?
Yeah, Mr. T.
Mr. T is like very well received.
That's a good
movie.
one.
Yeah,
but then he said Rocky 5 was a 0.
Yeah, it's a bad movie. I remember there are movies that kind of piss you off while you watch them, and that's one of them. Those are one of those movies that you're kind of like, fuck this movie.
Yeah.
With all your heart.
Yeah. It's like you're on a really bad date and you can't think of a reason to leave. You're just like, ugh.
Yeah. I don't drop the F-bomb much on this podcast, but
my job.
That one deserved it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, the more you know.
So that's the essential viewing there. Something I found really interesting during my research of sequels, prequels, and reboots is if you're somebody who can't get through a 3-hour film, I've got maybe an alternative for you, although I put an asterisk on that. A few years after Part 1 and Part 2 were released, Coppola and executives decided to recut Part 1 and Part 2 into a chronological miniseries. And so they essentially took Part 1 and Part 2, cut it into 4 parts, I think around just maybe hour 45 each, and added some new scenes into it and put it in chronological order of Vito's arrival in America right until the end of Part 2. And so...
Interesting.
So if you can find that, it's called The Godfather Saga. Why I put the asterisks on it is because in my reading, yes, it does make it a little bit more easier to watch in terms of timing because it cuts things off at the half hour 40-minute mark. However, the problem with putting it all in chronological order is it completely jumbles up the pacing of the films.
Yeah.
And so there is a problem with pacing. What I've read is that if you've already seen the films, it's kind of an interesting watch to watch it all happen in chronological order. But as somebody who's never seen the films, that's why I didn't bring it up in the when to watch, where to watch kind of section in our previous episode, because I don't think that's where you want to start with these series. I think you want to watch them in the original intended.
It sounds like it sounds neat.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe nothing more than a curiosity.
Yeah, it's something that, like as maybe if you're a Godfather diehard and you just want to experience the films in a new light, like it's just a different way to watch them. And it's kind of a neat experience, but it's not the best way to experience.
It's almost kind of like the Snyder Cut, right? I remember watching the Snyder Cut and be like, okay, like that was kind of interesting. Yeah. Now I'm never going to think about it again.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I have 2 other direct references, sequels, prequels, and reboots to this. The first is The Offer, which is a brand new TV show that came out last year, I believe. It's 10 episodes on Paramount Plus, and it's actually a TV miniseries about the production of The Godfather Part 1, and it's from the perspective of the producer of The Godfather.
That is interesting. I get it. The offer, as in an offer he can't refuse.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
So it's kind of neat. And I'm definitely going to check that out, actually, because I have Paramount Plus right now, and we're probably going to cancel it in the near future, I think. But
Are you all caught up on South Park?
Yeah. There's one other quick mention here that there are 2 Indian remakes of The Godfather, because of course they are.
Wow,
One
good
of
for
them
them.
is a 1995 Bollywood version, and another one is a 1997 Hindi version. So
How are they?
I can't imagine that they were as revered as The Godfathers, but if you're into Bollywood film and you want to check that out and see how they decided to interpret The Godfather, you're more than welcome to go check those out.
Maybe I will. What if I had shown up today having watched the Bollywood version?
Like a Train Spotting where we got that wrong.
Yeah.
There's a lot of singing. I wasn't expecting all this singing.
Yeah, jeez. This podcast is really going down the tubes.
That would have been hilarious. And also it's kind of problematic. All right. But anyway, let's move on. We've got a lot to talk about still. This is going to be a long episode for sure. So, effects and filming. So let's start with the novel, and then we'll move into the movie. So a lot of the novel is directly or indirectly inspired or based on true events of mafia stories.
Okay.
If you want to read up on any of the actual gangsters, it's the Gallo family. So Crazy Joe Gallo. It's basically, that's who Sonny is actually based on. And then Michael and Fredo are also based on Gallo family members. So there's actually some real stories there, but for timing, I think I'm going to move on from getting into the details of that. That's just further reading.
Interesting.
The Italian-American mafia crime syndicate were actually very against this movie being made. And this movie almost didn't get made because of them. They actually created an Italian-American Civil Rights League to try to get the film to be stopped from being made. They threatened the producers. Like they'd show up at their house and threaten them. Like it got pretty crazy for a time.
Wow.
And at one point, the producer, Albert Rudy, ended up having to meet with Columbo, Joe Columbo, like of the Columbo family.
Of the Columbo crime family.
And he basically said, you're not allowed to use the terms mafia or Cosa Nostra, which are like the terms for the mafia in America. So that basically to kind of like, put some of the the realism out of the film, so they weren't directly attributed to it, because they didn't want to be portrayed in a negative light. Now, obviously, that's not how they were portrayed. They were portraying a romanticized kind of light, right? And so they ended up really appreciating the film. Funny enough, after the film was made, like there was one particular mob boss that walked out of that movie saying, like, he was like profoundly affected by it, and it felt like, that he was walking out of a movie showcasing his life and the life of the mob. And there was several mob bosses afterwards that basically actually changed the way they talked and acted
to be
based
more
on The
like
Godfather, to
Marlon
be like
Brando.
Vito. Yeah.
Okay.
So they actually changed their voice and their mannerisms to be more like Vito.
That's almost so funny I can't even laugh. Like, it's like, you did such a good job portraying a gangster that, like, I think I also read somewhere that Francis Ford Coppola didn't actually do much research into actual gangster culture.
Well, and that's because also a little bit because the author had kind of already set the groundwork up for what the film was going to be about. However, on that note as well, Coppola decided to change a little bit of the perspective of the film to be in terms of capitalism. Like, the underlying theme of the movie is capitalism.
Well, how many times do they say it's just business?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of a critique on capitalism as well.
Well, there's that great line where Salazaro, or whatever his name is, says, like, blood is a big expense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Marlon Brando performing as Don Corleone, he doesn't actually look like that, if you weren't aware. He actually wanted to make Don Corleone look like a bulldog, and so when he was auditioning, he put cotton in his cheeks to kind of add that kind of droop to himself. And then when they actually started filming, he got a custom mouthpiece made by a dentist to look like that, like to have those big cheeks and that change
the
his
jowls.
Jawline. Yeah, exactly. And actually, if you ever want to go and see that little piece of film history, it's on display at the American Museum of Moving Image in Queens, New York.
Interesting.
Yeah,
because I saw Last Tango in Paris, which was around the same time, and he does not look that bad.
No, not at all.
Like
he looks very different. It's actually really funny how different he looks to Vito. And it's because of that, and again, a little bit the method acting and him wanting to portray the character as he felt the character was.
As a bulldog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lenny Montana, who played Luca Brasi, was so nervous about working with Marlon Brando that in their first take of their scene together, when they meet and like talk at the wedding, he actually he really flubbed his lines. Like when we see that on camera, that's him as an actor messing up his lines. But Coppola liked his genuine nervousness so much that they actually decided to leave it in the film. So like him messing up his lines there are like him as an actor being nervous more than him as like the character. But it was just so well done. And afterwards, because that they loved that shot so much, they actually filmed the scenes of him basically practicing his speech earlier.
And I hope that is a masculine child. Yeah.
I laughed twice when he said that.
Well, it's pretty funny because, like, during that scene, Vito looks a little put out. Like, he looks a little baffled by what's going on. And it's just like, all right, thanks. Go have a good time. Like,
yeah, yeah. Oh, man. I love everything about that. But,
you know, I'll know I've made it as an author when, like, some 6'7" bruiser is scared to meet me. That's when I'll know I've become successful.
Yeah. Talking about being successful and being intimidated is Mario Puzo, the author, was actually did not base the character of Johnny Fontaine off Frank Sinatra, despite me turning to Jess and saying that's totally Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Because I had read about this, like, I don't know, a couple months ago, that Frank Sinatra was connected with the mob.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was kind of assumed, like, even at that time, that character was essentially riffing Sinatra. And so Frank Sinatra was pissed that's how he was portrayed.
Yeah.
And so he actually met Mario in a restaurant and like almost assaulted him.
Oh.
And just like tore into him kind of thing.
You know what? I take it back. That's what I know I've made it as an author, is if celebrities try to beat me up.
Yeah, exactly. And so actually because of that, because of all of the uproar about that and Frank Sinatra's uproar, they actually cut Fontaine's role down in the film quite a bit, just down to those couple of scenes. He actually was a more prominent figure in the original script of the film. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
And on the note of being cut down as well, James Caan was also furious that his scenes were cut down as Sonny, because apparently there was up to 45 additional minutes of Sonny's character in the film. And so he lost it on the producer at the premiere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said, hey, you cut my whole fucking part out.
Jesus.
Even though he's still our favorite part
of
the
yeah,
movie.
like he's still a big part of the movie.
Yeah, he was furious.
Also, like, I hate to say it, but like, I feel like that's just the right amount of Sonny.
Yeah.
Like, what more could he have done?
Yeah,
like,
I
how
agree.
many more scenes could we have where he?
It's enough to appreciate him without getting irritated by him.
Yeah, yeah.
And he doesn't overstay his welcome as a character, and he could have.
A character like that definitely could have.
Yeah, on the note of his and his character's portrayal, his assassination, they filmed it in only one take because there was 149 squibs taped to his body to simulate the machine guns all hitting him.
Pew, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, like, you can only really do that once. I don't know how squibs feel to have them explode on you, but I can't imagine it feels great all of the time.
Probably not fun.
And so the actual technicians who put all the squibs on his body when they were doing it were like, wow, we've never actually put this many squibs on a person before. And Khan said, you didn't have to tell me that right now.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, not great timing there. Al Pacino's face, when he gets his jaw broken by the police chief by getting sucker punched.
Yeah.
I was kind of had mixed feelings about the makeup and what they used with it. Like, did that jump out as you as like, this looks odd, or were you fine with it?
No, but do you know what I did think?
What?
Because we're talking about timeline and stuff, because like, it seems like it took months for the bruising to go down.
Because his jaw was actually broken. And
yeah.
I think they should have maybe explicitly said that a little bit more, because I didn't realize his jaw was that busted until after
I think Sonny says broke his jaw, but like, I thought he was being hyperbolic.
Right.
I thought he was
here.
exaggerating.
But no, he legitimately broke his jaw, and so I agree with you.
Well, I've never broken my jaw, but I didn't know you could... He doesn't seem like he has a broken jaw. He's talking fine.
Well, he's talking, like, kind of muted. His mouth isn't moving much, and he actually, during those scenes, had his mouth wired shut.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I think that they could have done a little bit more, because I thought, you know, like, this looks like... I was like, for getting punched, I was like, this seems like a lot, right? But if his jaw broke, then you know what?
Also, like, okay, I've never I haven't been punched in the face in a while, but
I've
like,
broken my wrist, and my wrist got to that size. So like after understanding that it was his jaw that was broken and it wasn't, just a little bit of bruising, that I believed it after the fact.
maybe
but...
for me, it's more like in movies, people shrug off injuries a lot quicker. So it didn't seem like he got punched hard enough to break his jaw. But
yeah,
again, I don't know nobody's punched me in the jaw in a while.
He's a police chief. He's got some power behind that punch, I think.
Yeah, I guess so.
So earlier in our first part of our episode, or in our first part of our series, I mentioned that there was a Star Wars connection here.
You did. You did mention that.
I've got 2 Star Wars connections actually for you. The first is that George Lucas was the actual person behind what's considered called the mattress sequence, which is the montage midway through the film with the newspapers. He actually did that for Francis Ford Coppola.
What?
And it was actually favored to him for helping him fund American Graffiti, but was asked not to be credited on the film. So that's probably why that's maybe a little known fact. And George Lucas actually used real photos from crime scenes. So some of those like bloody pictures of like mob bosses being gunned down was actually like real life pictures.
Damn, George.
Frank Nitti, the enforcer, was Al Capone's right-hand man, and he actually just like he used that footage in there.
Hey, kid, you want to be a star?
Yeah. We talked about Corleone, Sicily, the city in which Michael spends his time in exile.
Yeah.
That wasn't actually the real Corleone, Sicily. There's actually a real Corleone that you can visit. But the problem is at that point in the 70s, it was too developed for them to show it off as the 40s version.
Right.
So they used Savoca. I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so that's where they shot it at. So if you ever want to go see like that beautiful town, I'm sure it's built up and it's not as beautiful as it once was, but that's a location that you can go and check out. Other location that I want to mention, and we actually mentioned this on a previous podcast, the executive producer's house was used, that awesome mansion with the backyard pools and everything.
Oh, okay.
Was actually used in the movie The Jerk. That's where...
Oh, yeah. I thought it looked kind of familiar.
Yeah. Jess Point was the one who noticed it as well. She was like, I think that's Nathan Johnson's house.
Although I didn't see any, what was it, like water coolers filled with wine? I didn't see any of that, so...
Yeah, so that was a real house.
I did think I saw Iron Balls McGinty wandering around, though.
Yep, Luca Brasi. That's the same guy.
Oh, that's right. Oh, man. I was just making a dumb joke.
Yeah, that's
Jeez.
Iron Balls McGinty is Luca Brasi, our other connection to The Jerk.
Wow. Was The Jerk before The Godfather
No,
or
it was
after?
after. It was
Okay,
after.
yeah.
I believe that one's 78, but I'm not 100% sure at this point in my mind.
Something like that.
But that house was actually burned down like right after The Jerk was made. So you can't go visit it. But it was in California. It was a real mansion. I love that we're building like this little bit of a VCR extended universe.
I guess so.
Of all of our connections to our films that we've been doing.
My headcanon is that those 2 movies take place in the same universe.
I love it. I love it. Iron Balls McGinty.
Yeah, really.
Before he became Luca Brasi.
Tragic. Or maybe...
You know what? He was shamed by his beating that he received from Nathan Johnson, and so he moved out to New York from California.
Or maybe he survived the garroting attempt, and then he reinvented himself as Iron Balls McGinty.
He said to hell with all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a character arc.
Yeah. I have one deleted scene that I want to mention because I think it's actually kind of very important. Fabrizio, Michael's Sicilian bodyguard who planted the bomb that kills Apollonia.
The one who betrays him, yeah.
Yes. In the original draft of the film, he was supposed to be found by Michael at a pizza parlor that he opens in America later on in the movie. And then at the end of the film was supposed to be Michael blowing him up with a shotgun, basically.
Wow.
And they actually filmed that scene. What ended up happening, though, is they cut it because the makeup artist used too much blood in the scene, and it ended up looking comical. How much blood was in the scene. So there's actually, if you Google Michael Corleone shotgun, you can probably find some pictures of the scene because it was a very widely used scene to promote the movie, even though the scene actually didn't end up in the
movie. Yeah.
But for those who are looking for a little bit of redemption, there is a scene where Fabrizio meets his untimely death in The Godfather Part 2 that was also cut.
This is not your day, Fabrizio.
But it was added to the Godfather saga, and I'm sure if you've got the ultimate edition of whatever Godfather 4K or Blu-ray film is out there, you could probably get that scene in there.
You know, what'd be funny is if they shot a Fabrizio death scene in part 3 and they also cut it. Yeah. But that time it was just Francis Ford Coppola being a dick.
All right, let's move into score. So the score is like honestly one of the most iconic scores of all time. I'm
not doing it, but
yeah, it's so memorable. Like I've had it stuck in my head since I watched this. You could pick any song within the film, and I could probably sing it back to you. Like when they're in the hospital scene, we didn't talk about this at all, but the hospital scene where Michael goes to visit Vito and there's nobody there is so eerie. Like,
oh yeah,
and they build the tension with that score of like that, like doom. Like it's just again another one of those scenes that tension is just built very well, and it's a lot of it's on the score to kind of do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's also like the first scene we really get to see how like quick-witted Michael is.
Yeah,
yeah,
I very much
and
agree.
Also thank God for Enzo the baker who just happened to be there.
Yeah. But actually, this is something that I didn't mention, but what I read about is so every single person who was given a favor at the beginning of the movie is ultimately pays back their favor.
That's
and
right.
Enzo is one of those people who pays back the favor at that point in time.
That's true, yeah. So is The Undertaker,
yep.
Balazzara or whatever.
Yep, and Johnny Fontaine, Frank Sinatra.
Also that. Not Frank Sinatra.
Not Frank Sinatra. I don't
want Frank Sinatra bursting into the room and kicking the shit out of us.
And we're talking about Oscars, so this is my first dabble into the Oscar discussion. So the score of The Godfather was actually nominated for an Oscar, but had to be withdrawn because they realized that some of the themes and some of the songs in the Godfather score were actually used in a composer's prior film, Fortunella.
So what, he like self-plagiarized?
Yeah, so the person is Nito Rota, who scored it.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually scored another movie that we talked about on this podcast. You might remember it was called 8.5.
It rings a bell.
And all of Federico Fellini's films.
Huh.
And so he was actually not eligible for it, but then he actually ended up winning the Oscar for Best Original Score for The Godfather Part 2, even though they used some of those same themes from the first movie in the second movie, which were also themes that were used in a previous film.
Okay.
So, convoluted a little bit.
Just a little. It's a good score, though.
Oh, it's a great score. It's one of my favorites of all time. Legacy. It's time to talk Oscars in full. I'm going to list out everything, and then we'll talk about some of these.
Okay.
The Godfather was the winner of the following Oscars. It won Best Picture for the year, Best Actor in a Leading Role for Marlon Brando. More about that later. It won Best Writing Screenplay based on material from another medium. So for the novel. And so there was two actual winners there. So it won 4 Oscars and then was nominated for another 7, I believe.
Wow.
So 3 nominations for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. James Caan, Robert Duvall, Al Pacino, all were nominated. All 3 lost. And I think that is actually because I did some research into this. And so the way the voting system works with the Oscars is you vote for one person. And so having all 3 of those guys competing against each other would have actually caused the vote to have been split.
Yeah.
And so it actually went to somebody from Cabaret.
From between the 3 of them, it would be hard to pick a front runner.
It's really wild, the fact that all 3 of them were nominated. And if you think about it again, like how much that splits the vote, and then so it goes to somebody else. So that might be a case of like it maybe should have gone to all 3 of them. Like maybe you tie them. But
I guess so.
But yeah, it went to somebody else. It also lost Best Director to Cabaret, Best Costume Design, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Music, but that one was withdrawn.
All to Cabaret or just to different movies?
A lot of them went to Cabaret, actually. Cabaret won a lot of awards that year. It's a movie that actually we're going to talk about in the second part of our Oscars discussion, because I haven't seen that film yet. You have.
A long time ago, yeah.
It was definitely one of the most important films of that year. That was the only real competition, in my opinion, with The Godfather. And so we're going to kind of maybe do a comparison between the two. But I believe Cabaret won 8 awards that year, while The Godfather won 3. So,
wow. Huh.
Yeah. So a lot of those awards that The Godfather did not win went to Cabaret.
And yet, Godfather is definitely the more iconic movie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the case of the Oscars being the Oscars, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
So... And you know what? And we haven't watched the Cabaret in a modern viewing yet. So
also that.
So we'll have to see. Maybe there's a discussion there. But what I did want to also mention is that this is the year, the very, very infamous year at the Oscars, that Marlon Brando decided to actually
not show
protest.
up.
Yeah, he protested the Oscars and instead sent a Native American woman named Sachin Littlefeather to accept the award for him and then explain why she was there and what she was protesting, and was not well received.
People booed. I saw the clip. Yeah,
people booed. It's a very dark time for the Oscars. However, even in that sense, it's a very controversial situation, because it turns out later in life that she actually wasn't Native at all. She was just a white person looking for a little bit of attention, although, good cause, but also very, very gray situation, the whole thing. So
I didn't realize she wasn't actually Native American.
Yeah, so there's a lot of controversy on both sides. I don't know who's right or who's wrong at this point in that situation. There was definitely some racism towards Native people at this time, and probably still is in Hollywood.
Definitely still is.
So so like, was the message there? Yes. Things got a little bit murky, and there's a whole lot of gray, and there's a whole lot of people that looked foolish. But
and fortunately, nothing bad ever happened at the Oscars ever again.
Oh God. That's part of the Oscars legacy of the film. Right now, it's rated number 2 greatest movie of all time to The Shawshank Redemption.
Huh.
What would...
On IMDb?
Yeah, on IMDb. Which is, and the top 250 is a pretty revered list on IMDb for movies. It's honestly, after just watching The Godfather, I think The Godfather is a better movie.
Oh yeah.
But if I had just watched The Shawshank Redemption and hadn't seen The Godfather for a few years, I probably would say that The Shawshank Redemption is the best movie ever made. So I think that I need to have a double feature night with The Godfather and The Shawshank Redemption to end this once and for all.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different movies.
Yeah.
Shawshank is more of a feel-good kind of movie. This more is a feel-bad kind of movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to debate there. There's also some discussion about whether or not, again, the votes got split with The Godfather Part 2, which I believe is 4th or 5th in the greatest movies of all time.
Okay.
So there's also some discussion there about whether or not it maybe split the vote. Some people who like The Godfather Part 2 more than Part 1. It's number 4. Sorry. It's our top 4 are The Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather, The Dark Knight, and The Godfather Part 2. And then 12 Angry Men.
There you go. There you go. Your buddy.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong to argue either of those movies. And again, you almost have to watch them back to back to decide which one you like better. Because for me right now, it's The Godfather. But if I watch The Shawshank Redemption next year or 2 years from now and haven't seen The Godfather in a couple years, it could be that I like The Shawshank more that day.
Again, it's kind of more of an apples to oranges kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're very different movies with very different feels and tones and vibes.
And equally pretty damn good. And both of those movies would make my top 10 list of greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So in terms of references for the film, because this film has a long legacy, I tried to look up on IMDb all the references to this movie, and I kid you not, it took minutes to load the list of how many references that have been in future films to this movie. Is legitimately, I couldn't load all of the references. So the Star Wars reference number 2 that I was going to mention is that George Lucas paid homage to The Godfather in very specific scenes in Star Wars. The first is the garroting death of Luca Brasi inspires Leia killing Jabba the Hutt.
Oh.
Yes.
Huh.
The second is the baptism scene. And
Oh,
so
Order 66.
Order 66. You got it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Pew, pew, pew. What is this? Amateur hour? Of course I got it.
So a direct reference there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, there's a direct reference to Breaking Bad when they have all the
inmates get killed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The scene has been used several times since, and every time it's been pretty effective. It's a pretty like jarring scene of indiscriminate violence.
Something about a montage of indiscriminate violence intercut with scenes of something not violent. It's always effective.
Yeah. Like I said, it's been parodied and referenced and redone in so many movies and so many TV shows that
I was just having lunch with my friend Andrew today, and I was telling him what we were doing today, and he said, "Did you ever watch Day of the Maniacs?" And I said, "Yeah, a little." He said, "I guess there was a recurring character called like the Godfather pigeon."
Oh yeah,
there was a pigeon who talked directly like Marlon Brando.
Yes, he was. I completely forgot about that. But I used to watch that show all the time.
Yeah, I forgot about that too.
That's so funny. But yeah, that's I think what we'll leave it with references. Unless you have a specific reference you want to also note there.
No, I think that's good.
Let's talk personal reviews of the Partner Factor.
Okay. Didn't watch it with a partner. My roommate kind of walked in and out of the room. I watched it alone, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. You know, it's funny. Like, I like movies, but whenever I have to watch something that's over 3 hours long, if there's part of me that's like, fuck, right?
Yeah.
But this was not a chore to get through.
No.
And that's kind of the highest praise I can give a movie.
Yeah.
This is like, I actually genuinely enjoyed it. I did have to watch, I watched 2 hours and then I had to watch the other hour later because I had to go to work last night. But yeah, it was still enjoyable to watch.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Is it in your top 10 list, do you think?
I don't know about my top 10, but definitely my top 20.
Okay, I'll give you
that. That's more a matter of taste.
Yeah. You watched Goodfellas like last year, didn't you?
Yeah, I sure did.
So that's like the other biggest like crime movie.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference over the two?
I don't know. I think I've told you before, I'm not usually that into crime movies.
Right.
But I did really like Goodfellas. I actually watched it like 2 weeks before the actor died.
Yeah.
I forget his name. I would say this is probably my favorite crime movie.
Ray Liotta.
Ray Liotta, yeah. I watched it 2 weeks before Ray Liotta died, but
Again, this is one where it's kind of fluid for me. I just watched The Godfather, so Godfather would be number one, but I'll watch The Goodfellas in a year, and I'll say The Goodfellas is my number one of crime films ever. I couldn't tell you which one is higher of the two. They're both equally amazing for different reasons in my mind.
Yeah.
And you know what the stark difference is between the two for people who haven't seen one or the other? Goodfellas is about the business of being a gangster, and The Godfather is about the family of...
I was just about to say, like, you see more of the dirty work in Goodfellas.
Yeah, it portrays it in like, this is how we were, and this is what we did to get to where we are, and this is the reality behind what we did. Whereas The Godfather is like, here's the family side of things and how we all dealt with what the hands we were given and how we lived and how we justified it to ourselves a little bit too, right? Because, you know, I don't think anybody in the Corleone family would consider themselves a bad guy. I think they were all people who were in the situation and did what they had to do in their minds to be successful and take care of their family.
In that kind of really somber scene, Vito kind of sort of alludes to the fact that he has no illusions about what the family business really is, but he's also pretty unapologetic about it.
Yeah.
He's like, I wasn't going to be made a fool. I wasn't going to dance on somebody's strings. I wanted to provide for my family, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Sonny was just too busy beating people up to care.
Yeah. So for my review, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. Objectively, it's definitely a top 10 for me. Like this one and Goodfellas probably sits in my top 10, and again, that's kind of a fluid list, so it moves up and down depending on when I'd last seen it. I do have to watch part 2 again to decide whether or not I like 1 or 2 better, but 2 probably sits in my top 20 if it doesn't quite sit in my top 10. I love these movies. They're just really enjoyable to watch. The pacing's great. They're just so engaging. Like the way that they're filmed, the way that they draw you into this world is just so intoxicating. And it's 3 hours of time that it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like I just sat down for 3 hours and watched a movie. Although it does feel like it's almost been 3 hours of podcasting.
Sure does.
We've been talking for a long time now. This podcast is going to take me an even longer time to edit. So I think that's probably where we should wrap it up.
Yeah, maybe. My neck's starting to get sore too.
Yeah, so
for those of you who can't see, which is all of you, this table's kind of low to the ground, and I have to hunch over to talk into it.
If we weren't splitting our episodes up, this would be our longest episode, and it wouldn't even be close because we've been talking for almost 3 hours before I cut this up into.
Has it been 3 hours?
It has been almost that long.
You know what though? It doesn't really feel like 3 hours. You know what? I mean, it'll feel like a lot longer for you, but it hasn't felt that longer.
No,
for
but
me.
this was a good discussion. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun diving into The Godfather. There's a lot of stuff that I learned both in front of the camera that I didn't maybe follow the first time, or even behind the camera stuff. And this was one of the more special episodes for me to dive into.
This was join us for a very special episode on Vintage Cinema Rewind.
Yeah. So I hope you all enjoyed this.
Go watch it if you haven't.
Yeah, go watch it. And next episode, we're going to check out Cabaret and compare and contrast the two afterwards, and how Cabaret managed to win 8 of the Oscar awards that
just hoovered him up that year.
Yeah, basically away from The Godfather. So I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to having that.
Yeah, definitely. All
right. Well, until next time, we still haven't come up with a tagline yet.
A man in my position cannot afford to be made a fool of. No. It's a man in my position cannot afford to look ridiculous.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.